for day 2 of the 31 films of Halloween. We are talking 13 Ghosts. Yes, we're talking about the 2000s remake starring Matthew Lillard. Now, what made me pick this film for the 31 films of Halloween for day 2? This is a film that I feel like is criminally underrated. I feel like it has in recent time gotten more recognition. I know Scream Factory put out a re-release on Blu-ray a few years back, and it was all the rage. Some beautiful cover art. I will say I absolutely love the cover art for 13 Ghosts from Scream Factory. It was a gorgeous looking Blu-ray. I've had to pick it up. I could not bring myself to spend $35 on that movie on Blu-ray just for that cover art, although it was some beautiful cover art. If you haven't seen the film, it's pretty much about this ghost hunter who is employed by this really rich guy to, help him find ghosts and stuff. And apparently he dies, and one of the relatives get the house. And it's just really he was wealthy, and Matthew Lillard's character, who's kind of this median, if you will, goes there to collect his money that he's owed. Come to find out he's dead, and he's like, okay, well, you owe me this money or whatever. And it's this really just fun, cheesy horror film. And it's one that I did not see upon its original release in the early 2000s, and I always kick myself for that because I finally watched this film years later, and I absolutely adore it. And it's one of those films that's not your typical. It's not a straight up horror film. It's one of those cheesy kind of gooey horror films that's not overly cooked, and it just has that fun about it. And this is again one of those horror films I feel like is criminally underrated, and it's such a period piece, or not a period piece. It's such a film of its time. In the early 2000s, you had a lot of great horror movies that really weren't great. 13 Ghosts, Ghost Ship, House of Wax, all these cheesy kind of horror films, because I feel like in the 90s you had Scream, which brought back horror and really kind of rejuvenated the genre. And then in the early 2000s, we had films like Saw, and you kind of got into that gory, really blood bash type of films, even though the first Saw was not a bloodbath movie at all. It was very much a low budget, person sitting in a room, no gore at all, hardly at all. It wasn't until the sequels did they get the body counts bigger, the bloodier, and so on and so forth. But again, in that early 2000s, you had Saw, and you kind of had the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. You had these reboots and remakes starting to happen. You had, Freddy vs. Jason, so you kind of had a mixed bag of horror films coming out. And I feel like there was this one kind of subgenre of horror where it wasn't completely comedy, but it wasn't completely horror. It was a blend in a way in which, it's not quite Evil Dead 2, but not quite Army of Darkness, where it's completely batshit crazy or just a complete straight up comedy. Whereas Evil Dead 2 kind of had that perfect blend. But in the early mid 2000s, we had that subgenre of horror that really, I think, went unappreciated in the time. And I feel like that's the reason why, and especially now with Matthew Lillard being rebirthed into stardom over the last couple of years, and everybody going back and talking about his work, I feel like rewatching this movie is something that everybody should do. Even if you've seen it, I feel like you need to rewatch it just to kind of relive that moment and just kind of pay tribute to Steve Beck, who directed this and Ghost Ship, and just did not have another directing job ever since. I'm pretty sure this and Ghost Ship was only 2 films he directed, and I absolutely love them. I love them both. And I kind of asked him, why did he not get any more work after this? He made 2 great, mid-2000s horror films. And I feel like they were poorly perceived at the time. And again, I don't know if he stepped away from directing and out of that role by choice, because I've said in my podcast that art directors who have small filmographies, and then when you go back and see why, and you listen to interviews like that, they just chose not to do anything else. They didn't want to. They had no desire. Which I always thought was crazy. If you're given that opportunity, I'm making as many horror films. Oh, I wouldn't make horror films, but as many films as possible for as long as possible. Like, I would never stop. Like, you're getting to the dream job. Why would you ever give that up? So the fact that people do stop making movies is mind-boggling to me. But going off topic, 13 Ghosts, it's a fun horror film. Just this really, fun film that I feel like everybody needs to rewatch. So that's my recommendation for film 2 of the 31 films of Halloween. What is your thoughts? What is your film 2 for the 31 films of Halloween? Comment below and let me know.